I am positively honored to have this opportunity to introduce Jill Christman to all of you today. In her most recent book, If This Were Fiction, A Love Story and Essays, Christman writes in brilliant narrative and reflective prose. Throughout the collection, she explores themes such as motherhood, trauma held by both the body and the mind, and yes, the love that lies at the center of each exploration that her writing undergoes. In a recent interview with Jill Talbot, published on Force Genre's website, Christman claims that for her, essaying is questioning, and that if she knows something, she is not going to write about it. This becomes evident in Christman's prose as she invites the reader along in her questioning process, putting entire blocks of questions on the page in her essays and pulling at the tension built in those blocks of questions as she explores the unanswerable inquiries that lie at the heart of each essay and each personal experience that she is sharing with her reader. Questions, however, are not the only way that Christman invites readers to join her in essaying that happens on the page. Throughout her work, Christman has a wonderfully authentic relationship with her reader that includes pausing, either narrative or exposition, to redirect her thoughts on the page, to flag her reader to pay close attention, and to add weight to the thoughts that will soon follow. In addition to If This Were Fiction, A Love Story and Essays, published this past September, Jill Christman is a 2020 NEA Prose Fellow and the author of 2 memoirs, Dark Room, A Family Exposure, which was the winner of the AWP Prize for Creative Nonfiction, and Borrowed Babies, Apprenticing for Motherhood. Her essays have appeared in magazines such as Brevity, Creative Nonfiction, Force Genre, Iron Horse Literary Review, Long Reads, and O, the Oprah magazine. She teaches creative nonfiction writing and literary editing at Ball State University and is a senior editor for River Teeth, a journal of nonfiction narrative. Please join me in welcoming Jill Christman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. There you're right there. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It means a lot to me. Thank you for the prayer. Thank you for having me here. Joey, thank you for inviting me. This is a whirlwind journey, but has been so fantastic, and I'm grateful to be here in the mountains. I'm a mountain girl, but I live and teach in Muncie, Indiana, where it is very flat, and it is incredible to be. I can't believe what you get to look at when you walk out the door of your classroom. So if nothing else comes of this visit, I beg you to remember to look every time you walk out of your classroom, because that is really something. What a gift. Okay, you've already seen the googly eyes. So, you know, it's funny. Tim thought of this googly eye idea. I had also thought of this googly eye idea, and now it comes together here at Brigham Young University. So you'll have to get your googly eyes, because I was almost out, but thanks to Tim, we have plenty of googly eyes for everyone. What else do I want to say? Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be back, whether you invite me or not, because I didn't have time to bring hiking boots and figure out a hiking plan, and I am not coming back to this beautiful state without hitting the trail, because it is something else. All right. Thanks to all of you for being here. I have been writing essays for about 15 years, and I never collected them between 2 covers until just this past year. And I was asked a very good question in the class, which I just visited, which was full of good questions, about how I decided to put it back together, put the book together. And in fact, I chose to put it together once I decided to do this very consciously. And I'm going to do this reading as kind of a medley from each of the 3 sections, just a little short snippet from each of the 3 sections. So it's organized into 3 sections, and I'm hoping it has a narrative arc, because I wanted to get that in there. But somewhere in the process, I realized that what I was writing was a love story. That's the title, A Love Story and Essays, for my husband, Mark, who is a poet, and our 2 children, Ella and Henry, and but also my fiance, who was killed in a car accident when I myself was an undergraduate at the University of Oregon, Colin. And most vitally, I think, for the purpose of this collection, for myself and the girl that I was, and the journey I have been on, and the woman that I have become. So that's the arc of the story. It has an epigraph, which it's kind of fantastic because it's a poem from E.E. Cummings, Since Feeling is First, which I'm sure many of you know. And normally it's hard to use poems in your writing because you can't get the rights to them because they're so short, so the percentage, I don't know if you've run into this. And being epigraph happy as I am, I have run into it a lot. And so it was a great joy to me when I did a little research and found out that this poem, Since Feeling is First, became public domain in January of 2022, just in the nick of time to appear in its entirety at the beginning of my book for free. So thank you, E.E. Cummings. Oh, here's the other thing. So my husband, Mark, we do way too many things together at this point in our lives, both in our family and in our career. So we're both senior editors at River Teeth. And he is a fantastic editor. I would like to say publicly that he is a better editor of my essays than I am of his poems. And I am sorry, my love. But he was super helpful in this process. And also, before he was a really good editor, he was quite the romantic. And so this poem was one that was whispered into my ear during the first couple weeks that we were dating. And it was an excellent move romantically at the time. And then 20 years later, it was an excellent move structurally. So I'm gonna appreciate the depth in that. Since feeling is first, who pays any attention to the syntax of things will never wholly kiss you. Holy to be a fool while spring is in the world. My blood approves, and kisses are a better fate than wisdom. Lady, I swear by all flowers, don't cry. The best gesture of my brain is less than your eyelids flutter, which says we are for each other. Then laugh, leaning back in my arms, for life's not a paragraph, and death, I think, is no parentheses. I've only published one flash essay in my life. It's done well for its little self. This is it. It's called The Sloth, and it begins the book, and it gives you kind of a backstory. It was published in Brevity in 2008, which is the year our son Henry was born. The Sloth. There is a nothingness of temperature, a point on the body's mercury where our blood feels neither hot nor cold. I remember a morning swim on the black sand eastern coast of Costa Rica 4 months after my 22-year-old fiancé was killed in a car accident. Walking into the sea, disembodied by grief, I felt no barriers between my skin, the air, and the water. Later, standing under a trickle of water in the outdoor shower, I heard a rustle, almost soundless, and looking up, expecting something small, I saw my first three-toed sloth. Mottled and filthy, he hung by his meat-hook claws, not 5 feet above my head in the cecropia tree. He peered down at me, his flattened head turned backwards on his neck. Here is a fact. A sloth cannot regulate the temperature of his blood. He must live near the equator. I thought I knew slow, but this guy was slow. Seriously, okay, this is my sloth imitation. I'm moving. I thought I knew slow, but this guy was slow. The sound I heard was his wiry-haired blonde elbow, brushed green with living algae, stirring a leaf as he reached for the next branch. Pressing my wet palms onto the rough wooden walls, I watched the sloth move in the shadows of the canopy, still reaching, and then still reaching. What else is this slow? Those famous creatures of slow, the snail, the tortoise, they move faster, much. This slow seemed impossible, not real, like a trick of my sad head. Dripping and naked in the jungle, I thought, that sloth is as slow as grief. We were numb to the speed of the world. We were one temperature. Another essay from part one, which is, and this section is excerpted from near the end of the essay and introduces a few new characters to my life story, is called The River Cave. a little joke I have about river teeth. I don't know if this is true or not, but before I was river teeth, I figured out this thing with the editors, Joe and Dan, where if I put river or water in the title, they would publish it. And so that's why you'll find that my first 3 essays that are in River Teeth have that theme going on, because I was like, they like the river they can't resist. They cannot resist. So this is an essay that was irresistible to them early on, probably just because of the title. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear the title up for the book in this section. I think all you need to know is that after, this will appear later too, after Colin died, I left school. I was at the University of Oregon and went on what I can only call a grief pilgrimage to Central America, where I spent some months trying to figure out how to live next. After Colin's death, it took me a while to rediscover fear. I remember a feeling of great and mournful recklessness. I tempted fate. And so one afternoon, about 4 months after the accident, I found myself at the mouth of a cave with 2 companions, Colin's brother and a woman whose brother had also died violently in the last year. We were a ragged and wounded team, and we were traveling through Central America together. The cave was in central Guatemala, and our guide was a 10-year-old boy who would not go into the cave. No. He waited in the dark mouth, sitting on a rock and holding the bag with our sandwiches. Here is a thing about me 15 years later. This essay was not written recently. I would never go into this cave now. I don't remember that we hesitated, even when our guide stopped at the mouth, sat on a rock, gestured into the wet blackness, and shook his head. No, not me, muy peligroso. Starting out, we had 3 flashlights between us, but happily we heeded the advice of the German back at the finca and melted candles here and there to the cliff walls as we headed in. This place was scary. Bats everywhere, hanging shadows, diving specters. Guatemala is one of those countries that vampire bats still call home, and I don't remember caring. And there's this. At one point, the channel got so narrow that the cave ceiling came down to meet the water. Did I mention that most of our mile-long journey was done waist-deep in a moving river, a cave river? We had to swim under the water. Holy. But I don't remember feeling afraid. Now, even thinking about how I plunged my head, my whole self, into the flooded, mysterious darkness, cognizant of the possibility that I would find rock and not air on the other side, well, I'm sickened. Before going under, I do think we hesitated. Clearly this was folly. But the German, was it the German again, had told us about this low point in the cave. He'd told us it would open up again on the other side. We'd known the German for 1 day. We dove under. I can't explain myself. Moving into this cave in my memory is like moving into memory itself. And at the point where the last of our 3 flashlights sputtered and expired, I want to say we were at a place where we would have been forced to turn back anyway. I want to say that we were standing at the top of an underground waterfall, but I can't conjure a clear vision, and wouldn't such a natural wonder burn its image onto my brain? Or perhaps my brain was too clouded by grief. I do remember the journey back, because I felt a shiver of fear, and I welcomed this unfamiliar prickle. I didn't want to die in this watery cave, and I was glad. We 3 were in blackness, and returning to the mouth of the cave meant feeling our way along the sharp edges of the walls and hoping we hadn't missed any branching channels, hoping the flickering light from our next melting candle would scatter off the swooping walls, a sparkle, a glint, but enough to lead us back to the cautious boy holding our sandwiches. Stupid, stupid Americans. The hike back to the finca took us through a banana grove with drooping leaves large enough to make a hammock for a baby. I remember feeling good to be out in the light again after so much darkness and only a sputtering of light. And then that night I got sick, the most wrenching sickness of the whole journey. And that was strange because we were at a ranch run by North Americans and there had been so much talk about the safe and delicious food. The place was poison. I spent the night on my knees in the grass outside our bunkhouse, feeling far, far away from home and wanting my mother. I wanted my mother to hold my hair and rub my back. I wanted ginger ale and saltines. I wanted to go home. For some reason, the moon, The dark was incomplete that night, or maybe by now the day was dawning. By my spot in the grass, a large iguana, large, stood on top of a ragged fence post, letting his tail drape dramatically down towards the too green grass. He rotated his eyes with a tick-tock of full vision, googly eyes. This guy could look anywhere he wanted, but he trained both eyeballs on me. I was on my back in the dankly warm grass, sharing my resting place with God knows what in this false fairy tale of tropical foliage jacked up by modern fertilizers. That morning before the journey to the cave, I'd been chased by 2 giant parrots, ripping rainbows of birds, screaming down from the treetops and skimming my ponytail with their wingtips. I was jogging, I told the iguana, delirious with fever and puking. I bet you know them. Around here, probably nobody runs unless they're running from something, huh? I was in Dr. Dolittle land, stuck in the glossy illustrations at the center of the book, talking in full dawning color to an enormous green lizard on a brown post in a green world. He seemed to understand. His world was changing too. I want to go home, I told him. If this were fiction, perhaps I could present that day and night in Guatemala as the apex of my fearlessness, wading into that bat-hung cave, lying in the grass with my large lizard friend. Shouldn't I have been afraid of him? But this is not fiction, and certainly there were other moments of both recklessness and jolting caution to litter the narrative path winding toward the paralyzing fear of new motherhood. 15 years ago, I walked into a cave and surprised myself by being happy to return to the sun. Telling the story of the river cave, I want the light to sparkle at the top of the metaphor. I want to pronounce loudly that I will not raise my daughter to live inside my fear for her. That sounds wonderful, but I have no idea what such a proclamation would mean in actual practice. When I think of Ella going so far from home, plunging her head into the murky wet, all those bats, my God, my heart clenches. But what if she wants to go into a dark subtropical cave, real or metaphorical? I don't know. Instead, perhaps I can find evidence here for a choice to be made. The choice to set up a family camp at the mouth of the cave with the boy holding the sandwiches. The choice to live in the light together. Would that work? Or do I have to be the boy with the sandwiches? Do I wait on the rock in the light, gripping the rolled top of the brown paper bag in my sweating hands, waiting for Ella to come back and eat with me? Ella just went off to college. It's very hard to read that out loud, it turns out, but I did it. Also, there are bats in her dorm. For real. Not in her room. In her dorm, though. Like, they had to have a kid get rabies tested. I was like, really? Really, Kenyon College? I call you out. Keep the bats out of the dorms, right? At least you should choose to go into the cave with the bats, not have the bat come to you. Anyway, all right, a little tone change here. I'm alert to the time. This will probably be the last thing I read. This one is called The Googly Eye. So you've heard the title. Now here we get the cover design. When Ella saw, you're all kind of Ella's age, a lot of you are. So when Ella saw the title, she was like, saw the cover, she's like, I was like, do you like it? She wasn't smiling. And she goes, well, yeah, but I mean, with the googly eyes again. So this is why. She's a good sport. For the record, I asked my children if I can write about them now that they've reached the age of reason. Before, Mark had gone to work. Mark is my husband, the poet. And Ella and I were sitting at the kitchen table eating avocado sandwiches. Ella was not quite 3. Laying a finger aside of her nose, Santa style, Ella looked at me in the eye and said, Mommy, my nose hurts. She paused. I have a googly eye in my nose. A googly eye, in our family lexicon, is a 3-dimensional white eyeball containing a shiny black disc that jiggles around behind a transparent plastic cornea. That's what makes it googly. I Googled googly eyes and learned that they're also called wiggle eyes or movable paste-on eyes. Googly eyes are flat on one side, the paper side, the side used for gluing eyeballs of various sizes to paper, shells, and upside-down egg cartons to make monsters, crabs, and silly caterpillars. The other side, the googly side, is convex, like the surface of a real eyeball. The googly eyes Ella's babysitter had brought over to stick onto funny monkey faces a few days earlier were big ones, at least half an inch across. Not the kind of thing, this is actually actual size. I don't know whether my press did this on purpose or not, but there you go. Not the kind of thing you'd want to have in your nose, especially if you were 3 and in possession of such a small nose. I considered all this as I chewed a suddenly over-large mouthful of bread that had turned hard and dry between my teeth. Washing it down with a gulp of lemonade, I studied Ella's face, her miniature button nose. How would a half-inch googly eye fit into that itsy-bitsy nose? Pulse quickening, I mustered all my parenting skills to keep my voice level and calm. As with most circumstances involving human error, I began with denial. What, honey? What did you say? She was watching me as carefully as I was watching her. Ella knew I had heard exactly what she'd said. Oh, Mommy, she said, reading the panic under my act. She tossed her hair back in mock hilarity. No, I don't have a googly eye in my nose. Ha, ha, ha. I don't. I was just kidding you around, Mommy. I didn't know what to do. How did she even think to say a thing like that? I have a googly eye in my nose. Honey, I said, do you have a googly eye in your nose? No, she said, glaring now. I said I was kidding you around. I let it rest. Maybe together we could pretend this one out of existence. And really, how could Ella have a googly eye up her nose? That would be nuts. That would be a medical emergency. And furthermore, how would it have gotten there? Ella's a smart girl. She wouldn't be foolish enough to insert a googly eye into her nostril. Who would do such a thing? Why? An hour later, I tiptoed into her room to check on her during her nap. She was snoring like a piglet. I put my face right up to her face as she lay on her pillow, cheeks pink, blonde hair sticking out every which way, cherubic as all get up. The snore really was more squeal than snore, and was I imagining this? The sound seemed to be coming from one nostril, the right nostril. Yes, a kind of whistling wheeze. While Ella slept and sang, I consulted a book. Foreign objects, nostril. The book said to not under any circumstances attempt to remove the object at home using a pair of tweezers. Tweezers, I thought. Of course. What a good idea. I read on. The removal process was a delicate one, and not only could a hapless, panicky parent with a pair of tweezers damage the delicate nasal tissue, she could also make matters worse by A, lodging the object more deeply in the nose, or B, actually pushing the object into the throat, which could cause choking. The thing to do, the book said, was to call a doctor. I considered a plan of action, contemplating the possibility that this was all in my mind, and waited for Ella to wake up. I leaned over her face and studied her nose. Was that a lump on the right side? Meanwhile, Mark was still at work, talking about poetry. When Ella woke up, I was waiting. She sat up and rubbed her nose. She whimpered and repeated her confession. My nose hurts. I pulled a book light from a shelf and sat on the edge of her bed. Okay, honey, I am going to look up your nose and see what I see. As I moved in with the light, I heard echoes of that fierce child from Carlos Williams' The Use of Force, the flushed and feverish girl the country doctor has to hold down using a big silver spoon to pry open her teeth so he can see her throat. It's not quite that bad, but Ella fights it. Just as the wild-haired, blue-eyed Matilda refuses to reveal and thus confirm her diagnosis, diphtheria, Ella wants to hide her own disaster. No, Mommy, I was kidding you around. I don't have a googly eye on my nose. I don't. Yeah. Swinging a leg over her little body, I pinned her forehead to the pillow with my left hand, gently. Then I angled the thin beam of the booklight up her right nostril. How do I describe what it was to look into my preschooler's nose and see an eye, a googly eye, staring back at me? Accumulating mucus had slicked the surface, giving the eye a shining, evil glint. Ella twisted under my hold and let out a squeaking cry. In the sudden burst of air, the eye shifted, and the dark pupil rattled with a menacing shimmy. I wanted to scream. But good, calm, handling things mothers don't scream when they shine lights into their children's noses, do they? Even if there's someone up there, staring them down. I blinked and looked again. Crap. I flicked off the light and released my grip on Ella's forehead. Okay, I said, okay, all right, sweetie. There's a googly eye in your nose. Okay, so then there's a medical procedure, as you might imagine. It goes on for some pages. The next morning at breakfast, I asked Ella why she did it. What I wanted to know compelled her to stick that googly eye in her nose. Looking sad, she said, I thought it would be different. Oh, I thought, yeah, that's it. Ella's assessment explained a lifetime of my own biggest mistakes. I thought it would be different. As a kid, when I jumped off the roof of the house with a garbage bag as a parachute, I thought it would be different. In high school, when I signed up for that course in trigonometry, I thought it would be different. Still in high school, when I climbed into the Jeep with the way too old for me boy who'd been drinking Blue Hawaiians out of a milk jug, I thought it would be different. Having survived and made it to college when I stuck out my tongue, I do not recommend this, and accepted the proffered tab of LSD at the Oregon Country Fair, I thought it would be different. Later, in graduate school, and certainly old enough to know better, when I traipsed after my girlfriend in the steaming, snake-infested Alabama woods at midnight to find a skinny dipping hole, I thought it would be different. When I was laboring with Ella and I refused to let the nurse find a vein and put in a hep lock, I thought it would be different. In all of these unfortunate circumstances, before I stepped forward and entered my own mistake, too deep to extract myself without feeling pain or embarrassment, or both, of my own bad choice, I thought it would be different. I neglected to consider how hard the ground, how unfathomable the function, how drunk the driver, how potent and troubling the drug, how thick the underbrush, and how much a woman can bleed. What then had I wanted? How had I thought it would be different? Well, I thought the bag might catch the air and carry me like a paratrooper or a butterfly, gently to the ground. I thought my mastery of sines, cosines, and tangents might elevate me to another level of intellectual superiority in my high school. I thought the boy in the Jeep might think me adventurous and cool, and in return would love me. I thought the LSD might take me somewhere beautiful, away from the stinking porta potties and patchouli of the dusty fair, to a place of pure happiness. I thought the swimming hole would be right down the road, just 5 minutes, and that the Alabama moon shining on the water would illuminate everything. And I thought I would give my baby safe and natural passage into this world without drugs or intervention. I thought it would be different. Different how? I asked Ella, watching her skewer a piece of waffle with a toothpick. She shrugged. Can I play now? I nodded, and she slid down from her booster seat, dutifully parroting Dr. Rock's good advice. We never put anything in our ears or noses. Right, sure. But then, what if we could stick googly eyes in our noses to see the dark secret of our bodies? How cool would that be? I'm going to stop there. Thank you. She kept the googly eye in her memory box, and so she asked me that I don't bring it around to readings in the little plastic bag. She thinks that's a step too far. So I am happy. I have about 15 minutes to answer questions. I am happy to entertain any questions that you've got. I'm very happy you're here, so fire away. Yes?
My question is about the avocado. At what point, I guess, tell us about the origin of that essay, if you would, and then also at what point when you were writing that essay did you realize it was really about the human body? Like about the female body?
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Very good question. I'm glad that we're finally getting to it. So, The avocado began, so it is an essay about the way in which, if I were to pin it down to one thing, I would say it's the way in which my female body has carried me and borne all of the experience that I have gone through from grief to joy and everything in between, right? And it is called The Avocado, and it was one of those magic moments. It's the only essay I've ever written in my life, so don't think this is a thing that happens all the time to me. It might happen to y'all, and I am a little bit envious of that. That actually began at the beginning. Like the sentence that begins the essay came to my mind while I was walking, and I had it. But the thing that really began the essay was an actual avocado. I was at a dinner party, and I was sitting at the counter, and I was asked to help with the salad, and I was handed an avocado. And this is many years after the events that take place, which were also during that grieving journey in Central America. And I sliced open the avocado, and I saw the way that brown pit lay against the green of the bisected avocado, and it was like it was a portal to memory of the day I bought an avocado when I was in Costa Rica, when all these men on the street were hissing at me, and I had walked back to my room alone with this avocado and sliced it open, and I just looked at it. And so when I left the party that night, I said, I kept the avocado in my hand. I was like, I'll be taking this avocado pit with me. And so I did, and many avocados were consumed in the writing of the essay. So this is kind of a writing tip, actually, right? So I couldn't have the avocado back from when I was 20 years old in Costa Rica, right? That would be gross and impossible. But I could get the avocados that were accessible to me at my local grocer, which I did. And I spent a lot of time just like looking at the avocado. And then that led to, there are many moments, Megan asked me this in the car, she very kindly drove me here, and there are many moments, I love those moments when we're writing essays that surprise us, right, where we get to a moment and we didn't know that it was going to happen. So as I was writing The Avocado, it of course returned me to a place of grief, which returned me to the place of Colin's accident, and I had this realization in the way that writing begets writing, right? I followed that essay was such a mess, and I just followed each thing to the next thing without judging myself for taking me there, right? And the next thing was like, oh, there's Google Maps now. I could go to the intersection where Colin was killed and look at it right now if I wanted to, from my couch in Muncie, Indiana. And I did. And at this point now I'm a mom, right? This is the point from which we're telling the story. I'm a mom. I'm looking at this moment, and I just felt this stab of fresh grief. It was like a new grief I had not felt before. And it was this recognition when Colin was killed, he and his work buddies, they were working on blimps and in these giant hangars in Tillamook, Oregon, and they were killed at a crossroads on their way to get pizza. They'd worked late, and it was 9 o'clock at night, and I thought to myself in this new place where I was writing from, oh, they died hungry. Right? And I was like, oh. And so then once I found that moment, right, which was like a real emotional reaction inside the writing for the writer, then that took me back to Costa Rica so to get to your question of when did I realize it was about bodies, it was when I was thinking about the volcano and looking at the volcano, and I had that thought, Arenal, which is the volcano specifically I was writing about, is all woman. And I thought, oh, how she's held it all. And then I realized that that's what the essay was about. Was that a satisfying answer? Okay. And I do a writing exercise with my students. Actually, this is fun. It's called animal, vegetable, mineral, right? So you choose an animal. So in this case, it's the leafcutter ants. Choose a vegetable, avocado. Choose a mineral. In this case, I chose a volcano, right? But you could have any animal, vegetable, mineral. And then you write 3 things that somehow attach to your life in some way, right? But just write those things. Don't think about how they're going to thread together. And then put them together. Animal, vegetable, mineral. See what happens. Don't judge the process. Other questions? Yes?
One thing that I really admire about your essays is the way that they're all supported by such rich narrative. So I was wanting to ask if you could speak a little bit about the way that you find the balance between the narrative aspect and then the reflection. Like, do you write narrative first and then reflect on
Yeah, thank you. I'm a fiction writer by training because we didn't have creative nonfiction programs when I was coming up. And so, and kind of my bread and butter tool as a writer is scene, right? Like I feel comfortable there. In fact, I feel so comfortable there, so I thank you for saying that that's a strong part of it, that I make myself leave, right? Because I can get so comfortable there that I realize that I'm recounting events, maybe, I hope richly, but I'm not actually getting to the crux of things, right? So like I try to leave the narrative in the writing. I'll often write narrative as a way to find out what I'm trying to write about. There's always a question at the center of everything I do. I never know where I'm going or what I'm doing. And if I arrive at an answer, I realize that I haven't written the essay carefully enough and that I need to return back and find the truer question. But like for the googly eye, right? I knew I was getting somewhere. That essay's origin is in that phrase, I think probably obviously, where Ella said, I thought it would be different, right? And yet I knew it came with this good story of this like hapless new mom trying to figure out what to do, right? And I knew that there would be some comedy there and some tension, right? But at that moment where I get to the dialogue, I thought it would be different. I knew I had to leave the narrative, right? Because really that's where the center of that essay is, in this kind of understanding what it is we do as humans when we make mistakes and how we live in those mistakes, right? So I guess how do I find the balance is that, well, one way I do it, this is another kind of a thing I tell my students, but I will often look at an essay when it's drafted and write scene or summary or analysis in the margin so I can see like the pattern of how much there is of each thing. And if it's like pages and pages of scene, I think, all right, you need to get in here and get your hands a little dirty because you're not going for what you might be chasing after. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you, that's great.
Yeah, that's a handy exercise. That can be a handy exercise. Because everything we write is somehow made of that. Yes?
So in your writing, you often like write about like events that may have happened like years ago. So what my question is, how is like distance like from that event happening? How does it make that event?
Yeah, that's a really good question also. Well, the distance from the event is huge. It's huge, but and it helps us to figure out. So we were talking about this thing. A wise teacher of mine says that I've stolen from her and used a million times. But whenever I'm working on an essay, at some point I ask the question, why here, why now, right? So like, why return to this? When we're writing essay or memoir, and you can add this thing that Trish Hampel, the memoirist and essayist, said once that has been so helpful to me. We return to a moment or moments so that we might ask a question and move forward, right? So I also think about that the momentum of that, like what it would mean to move forward from this moment and what questions I would need to be addressing in that place I've returned to do that. So in terms of distance, I think one thing, it's a very popular piece of writing advice. So if you've gotten it, this is no judgment on your teachers who gave you this advice, especially anybody who might be in this room. But I think we often hear, oh, you need to wait until you have distance from that thing, right? How many of us have heard that advice? So just a handful. I certainly did. I heard it a lot, right? I actually don't think that's true. Yes, it will be different when you have distance, but what is distance also? Like what is it? What's implied in that? I'm not exactly sure. But it'll be a different essay if you write it 5 minutes after it happens, a week after it happened, 3 months after it happened, 20 years after it happened, right? And it all has to do with kind of where you're standing to tell the story. So one thing I really advise people to do is not to think, oh, I need distance on this. Maybe you do. Maybe there's some element of that that's true for you. But you can write down what you want to write down now, right? Both that writing and the event are not going to go anywhere, and then you can return to it again later if you want, and you can return to it again and again and again. The things that you have arrived at the page, the thing that has either hurt you or amazed you into writing, right? Those are always going to be your things, so they will always be there for you. Does that answer your question? When I say that, does that answer your question? You can really tell me if it doesn't, and I'll keep trying. All right, we have about 8 more minutes. Yeah.
When you have that sort of distance, are there ever moments where you forget exactly what
Yeah, yes. But I try to do it truthfully. So, I really take seriously the fact that as a nonfiction writer, I have an option. I write fiction also. I can write fiction when I want to write fiction, right? So I really do take very seriously the fact that when I'm telling you a story, I try to tell the truth to the best of my ability. Of course, that is memory, right, is an issue. Fear of various things, of judgment, of family reaction. Oh, there's so many things that stand in the way of us and the truest thing we can say. In terms of memory, one way it was a little bit in River Cave right there, right? One way I get to it, like I kind of feel like I remember a waterfall at the end, but then I don't quite, like I can't quite, like I could just say I remember a waterfall. You wouldn't know the difference, right? But I would know that I'm feeding you a line, right? So I kind of, but I don't, so I say, I kind of remember this, but I don't quite, right? So that's another place I tell the truth. And if I really want to go somewhere where I don't remember something big, I'll say, I imagine, I want to remember, right? I'll just give a little tilt of hand to let the reader know that I'm going on a little bit of a journey, right? And that the journey they're on with me is in my mind, right? And probably can't be fact checked exactly. That said, I also write things down a lot. I write things down a lot. So often I'll have, like from my grief journey, I have tons of notes. All I did when I wasn't wandering around in the volcanoes with the leafcutter ants is sit on my sad little bed and write things, So I write things down right away after they happen a lot. So I often have source material that I can go back to, like my own private source material. Alison Bechtel gave a tremendous talk about this once at Nonfiction Now. Were you both there? Wasn't that an amazing talk? That was one of the best talks I've ever seen on memoir. And I did find it in audio. It exists in audio, which is unfortunate because Alison Bechtel, of course, is a graphic artist, and you really need her drawings to really understand what was going on. But she had this image of herself that she displayed during that talk, and it was of her kind of crawling through all of the material she had, and she was talking about how memoir is a subtractive process, and you have to kind of cut away all this stuff. And I always think of that, like which part of this story matters. Because I think sometimes we feel afraid to write about something because we think, oh, we can't remember everything. You don't have to remember everything. That thing that stuck in your mind, that's probably the thing that you need to look at. And the thing that didn't stick in your mind, the thing that you forget, the gap from that time, likely matters as much as the thing that did, right? And so you can think about it as a gap. Sorry, I got that a little philosophical, but my main message there is don't let fear of not remembering everything exactly keep you from starting. Also, memory begets memory, right? I mean, how often do we start writing something and more memory comes to stick to it, right? But we have to be there in the memory for that to happen. Is all of that, we know that humans are not good reporters. Like, the car was green. I'll do that 5 minutes after it happens, right? But we try. I try. Satisfying answer? No more? I mean, I could talk about memory all day long. That's what we do at our conferences. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned in the Q&A with the nonfiction students about your daily writing practice and how important that is to you, and that I think you said you have 3 projects going at once. Could you talk a little bit about the work part of the writing you do, and then the daily commitment to what it takes to finish projects?
To me, it absolutely is a discipline, and it's like, that is the joy of it. It is the same joy I bring to yoga. It is the same joy I bring to cooking, but it has to happen for me, it has to happen at least 6 days a week for me to feel like I'm in it. And for example, I got out of it last fall when the promotion for this book, I was just traveling so much, I just couldn't. And I start to lose the center of kind of who I am and how I navigate the world. Like, it's depressing to me. So it's both the getting the work done, which for me, I think the main thing to do is really figure out what it is that helps you do that. It could be a physical location. It could be something you do. It could be the time of day. It is not the same for everyone. For me, I absolutely have to do it without internet first thing in the morning, right? And it doesn't even need to be more than 15 minutes a day. Yes, in the summer, I'll often give it 3 hours a day, right? but during the semester, reasonably, I don't have 3 hours a day, right? But if I'm writing for even 15 minutes a day, which often grows into an hour, because once I'm there, right? It's the getting your butt in the chair that is the right? We all know this. And no matter how much we know this, like all the professors in the room, we're thinking, yeah, we fall off. Like we do. I'm telling you, we do. And we climb back on again, right? And then we're like, oh, I remember you writing. This is how I like to live. So for me, it's daily. I know that that's not for everybody, although I kind of think it might be deep inside. Because when you're writing in a regular practice, your brain is writing all the time because you know you're going to be there, right? So it trusts you to return to the page. So it's going to give you stuff all the time, and you're going to be, to write, we have to live in kind of I also think this is kind of part of my daily practice, curiosity, and like living in a state of curiosity and in a state of like being present enough to notice things, right? So that I can see them. And so all of those things I bring back to my writing when I'm on a regular schedule. So this is something I've started. Like I have my students now, they're doing it this week, and at first they look at me like I've completely lost my mind. I have them define the habit of their art. How do they do it? Where do they do it? What's their commitment going to be like? Do they need to have an accountability partner? Some people need to be able to say, look, I'm writing 5 days a week for 20 minutes a day. Are you going to do it too? On Sundays we'll check in and we'll see how it went. And some days you'll say, I didn't do it. And some weeks you get to say, yeah, it was great, I did this. Right, so I think there's a lot of different. Are you a daily writer? You write a lot.
I feel like I'm off the horse right now a little bit.
Yeah, how does that feel?
Awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just finished a book project and kind of treading water, so it's inspiring to hear.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good, and when I don't know, it feels awful. And so then that's why I have different projects, because sometimes I can't work on something long, or sometimes I've left a big book projects for too long and I can't, in the middle of a semester, I can't hold 400 pages in my head to be figuring out where that's all supposed to be. So I'm like, okay, all you need to do is I keep an image notebook also, like an actual physical image notebook, and like if I see, I have so much to write down from today, y'all are gonna have to be quiet for a minute. But so I can write things down, and all I do is like pick an image and write for 15 minutes. And usually, as soon as I'm doing that, I'm gonna be doing something else. But if you think there's too much, I can't concentrate, I couldn't write well right now. It doesn't matter. Write badly right now. That's fine. Okay, I promised. Does anybody have like a one-word answer question? Okay, one word. Go ahead. It's Dental.
Well, I just had a quick question. For a definition of distance, would emotional reaction work? As in, if you want distance from something, it means your emotional reaction to whatever happened is now less. So you need to wait until the emotional reaction is less. If you're doing it now, then you're going to have a larger reaction to it, and it's going to show in your writing.
I appreciate the attempt to define, but I don't think it can be that simple. Okay. So the one-word answer is going to be no. But thank you for giving me a one-word answer, and I think that's definitely something to think about. All right, thanks everybody. Sentil. I'll be signing.